Assalamualaikum and hi. Our presentation examines how trade wars affect global economy stability through a comparative analysis of Singapore, Malaysia, and the Europe Union. The US-China trade war began in 2018 when the United States imposed a tariff on hundreds of billions of dollars worth of Chinese goods. China responded with its own tariff, creating tension between the world's two largest economies. Because these countries account for a large share of global trade and GDP, the effects quickly spread across international supply chains, exports, and investment flows. The study has three objectives. First one is to identify the trade vulnerabilities of each economy. Second, to analyze government policy responses and economic diplomacy measures. Third, to develop practical strategies that can improve resilience against future trade disruption. We selected Singapore, Malaysia, and the EU because they represent different levels of development, trade dependency, and institutional capacity. This study is supported by three important economic theories. First, Ricardo's comparative advantage theory states that countries benefit when they specialize in producing goods they can produce efficiently and trade freely with others. Trade wars reduce this benefit by introducing tariff and barriers. Second, the Heckscher-Ohlin model explained that countries export goods that use their abundant resources. This helps explain why Singapore, Malaysia, and the EU have different trade structures. Third, Krugman's new trade theory highlights the importance of economics of scale and global supply chains. Modern industry depend on interconnected production networks which become vulnerable during trade conflicts. Based on these theories, we develop a framework that evaluates trade vulnerability, policy response capacity, and resilience outcomes. This study used a comparative qualitative analysis approach. We compare Singapore, Malaysia, and the Europe Union over the period from 2018 to 2025. These economies were selected because they provide a balance between developed and developing countries, as well as regional and global perspective. Our analysis followed three steps. First, trend analysis using GDP growth, trade to GDP ratio, and foreign direct investment inflows. Second, comparative case analysis of trade vulnerabilities and policy responses. Third, cross-country synthesis to identify key similarities and differences. The data was obtained from reliable sources such as the World Bank, IMF, WTO, UNCTAD, the European Commission, and Singapore's Ministry of Trade and Industry.
First is key economic indicator. This slide summarizes the economic performance of the three economies during the trade war period. All three experienced lower GDP growth between 2018 and 2023. Singapore growth declined from 3.45% to 1.8%, while Malaysia growth fell from 4.84% to 3.54%. The EU recorded the largest decline from 2.05% to 0.45%. In terms of trade dependency, Singapore remained the most exposed economy with trade exceeding 300% of GDP. Malaysia recorded around 130%, while the EU stood at approximately 19%. Interestingly, Singapore FDI inflow increased significantly as multinational firms shift operation away from China. Malaysia experienced only modest gain, while EU inflow declined substantially during the period. Next is Singapore and Malaysia. Singapore was highly vulnerable because of its heavy dependence on international trade. During the trade war, non-domestic export declined and GDP growth slowed significantly. However, Singapore responded quickly through free trade agreement, enterprise grants, workforce retraining, and investment promotion. As a result, it attracted firms relocating from China and achieved record manufacturing investment. Malaysia experienced a mixed outcome. The electronic and electrical sector contribute around 38% of total export, making the country highly dependent on global supply chain. Although Malaysia was expected to benefit from trade division, its reliance on Chinese input limited this giant. To strengthen resilience, Malaysia joined RCEP and introduced the new Industrial Master Plan 2030. However, technological limitation and currency volatility remain important challenges. The last one is EU and cross-country funding. The European Union demonstrated the highest level of resilience among the three economies. Although it was affected by US tariff on steel and aluminium export, the EU responded through WTO legal action, counter-tariff, and new trade agreements such as the EU-Japan Economic Partnership Agreement. Its large domestic market and diversified economy helped reduce the overall impact. When comparing the three economies, Singapore was the most vulnerable because of its extremely high trade dependency. Malaysia occupied a middle position due to its reliance on manufacturing supply chain. The EU proved the most resilient because of its strong institution and diversified economic structure. These findings show that resilience depends not only on economic size but also on diversification and policy capacity.
Now, I will present part of policy implication and strategy recommendation. Based on our findings, several recommendations are proposed. For Malaysia, industry upgrading should be accelerated through greater investment in research and development, technical education, and high-value manufacturing sectors such as semiconductor and aerospace. For Singapore, the focus should be on innovation, digital trade, and attracting high technology industry. This will strengthen its position as a global knowledge hub. For the European Union, efforts should continue to expand trade agreement and strengthen the WTO dispute settlement system. Overall, all three economies should diversify trade partners, strengthen the economic diplomacy, and reduce over-dependence on any single market. The next section is focused on implementation consideration. Successful implementation requires both short-term and long-term action. Malaysia should strengthen supply chain coordination, attract investment, and expand technical education program. Singapore should continue increasing R&D spending and supporting digital trade initiatives. The European Union should accelerate free trade agreement and secure access to critical raw material. However, several remain political resistance may slow reform, fiscal constraints may limit government spending, and geopolitical tension cloud create new disruption. Therefore, government should conduct regular policy review and remain flexible in responding to changing global trade conditions. In conclusion, this study demonstrates that trade wars pose a serious threat to global economic stability. Singapore is highly vulnerable because of its dependence on global trade. Malaysia faces supply chain challenges due to its manufacturing structure, and the European Union has shown the strongest resilience through institutional strength and economic diversification. The key reason is that countries must diversify trade relationships, strengthen regional cooperation, invest in innovation, and support the multilateral trading system. By taking this measure, economy can better prepare for future trade conflict and maintain long-term economic stability. Thank you for your attention.